Welcome to the webinar on Keys to a Successful School Startup. My name is Annette Thacker-Bartlett and I am with the OSSE Division of Elementary, Secondary, and Specialized Education on the Training and Technical Assistance team. This brief webinar is meant to help you prepare to serve students with disabilities at the start of a new school year. Today's webinar will discuss child find evaluation and IEP responsibilities, DC state-level special education policies, how to obtain student records at the beginning or middle of a school year. It will also point out key OSSE resources to support you in your job, as well as upcoming training opportunities. At the end of the webinar is a glossary of key terms. For those of you unfamiliar with DC, it defines many acronyms that are used in the educational landscape. First, let's discuss child find evaluation and IEP responsibilities that you may have. One of the most important things to have in place at the start of the school year is a robust student support team process. Your school might call this by a different name, such as a multidisciplinary team, a student problem-solving team, or a student intervention team. This process is important to have in place because when you have a student that you suspect might have a disability or be in need of other types of intervention, there needs to be a procedure in place whereby staff gather and start discussing the student and gathering information about the student. Additionally, all staff at your school need to understand key special education requirements, especially when it comes to things like evaluation and reevaluation, and making that decision about whether the student has a disability. And then after the student enters the special education program, of course, your staff that are involved with special education need to be fluent in the IEP process, as well as be familiar with discipline and least restrictive environment principles and laws. One of the best things you can do to start the school year off right is to have a system in place to train new staff and existing staff about special education. In particular, your general education teachers that may be unfamiliar with special education, giving them a little bit of training throughout the school year can really help them serve those students well in their classroom settings. Another item on your to-do list for the beginning of the school year is to make sure IEP teams are in place, that every student has an IEP team, that every student with a disability has a case manager, and that you have enough related service providers on staff to meet the needs of each student with an IEP that might be in need of related services. Setting up a calendar is also crucial to getting ready for the start of the school year. I will talk about this a little more in detail, but right now is the time when you should be putting this together. And one important item is with regards to the Special Education Data System, or SEDS, or Easy IEP, as you may refer to it. This is the online database where all of the documentation is kept for students in special education. You need to make sure you have a system in place for ensuring that any new students that come along to you are able to get those records into SEDS as soon as possible. According to law, you need to make sure within 5 business days that you have uploaded any documents that are required to be in SEDS. This document is a checklist that you might find helpful in preparing for the school year and to use throughout the school year. It has to do with making sure that you are on time and compliant for reevaluations and annual IEPs. This checklist can be useful as you sit down with your team and plan for the school year. This checklist document is available for download on the same page where you accessed this webinar recording. So we encourage you to use it. It is not required, but it can be a useful resource. By the start of the school year, you should be able to compile a complete list for every single student that is in special education. And on that list should be the dates of any upcoming annual IEP meetings and reevaluation deadlines. So this should be a month-by-month list that you can look at to plan ahead and make sure you don't miss any timelines or deadlines with regards to IEPs and evaluations. You can make this list by looking at your list of students with IEPs that are found in SEDS. You can also make this list by using the LEA Planning and Performance Report, which is a report available in SLED, and someone at your school should be able to access SLED and find this report. And that report gives you a heads up as to what's coming down the pipeline with regards to upcoming annual IEP and reevaluation deadlines. Another list that you might want to start keeping is a list to track the training that you've provided to your staff. This is just a sample template of what that list could look like, where you can list the staff member names, the date they were trained, any quality control feedback. Especially for your staff who are new to your school or unfamiliar with the IEP process, yet are going to be part of an IEP team or in serving students with disabilities. Documenting the training that you provide to them, even if it's informal training, could be a really good idea in case anything comes up in the future. Each LEA is required to have one person at the LEA who serves in the role of the LEA Special Education Point of Contact, or the LEA SE POC as we refer to it. This person is OSSE's main point of contact with the LEA. They act as that liaison for any issues that might be happening with special education, in particular with issues in SEDS and the student records for students with disabilities. Now you might choose this person to be your special education coordinator. Some LEAs choose their director of student support to serve in this role. Some choose their director of special education to serve in this role, or some choose a special education coordinator to serve in this role. It's up to your LEA which staff member is chosen to serve in this role, but each LEA must designate one person to serve in this role. And of course, they can delegate some of their duties to other staff members, especially if you're in a larger LEA. But OSSE needs to know who this designated person is, as we will interact with them quite a bit throughout the school year. Now, the responsibilities remain largely the same, but from year to year they might change a little bit depending on LEA level needs or state level needs. All POCs are asked to participate in monthly webinars where we remind them of their responsibilities and bring up any new issues or deadlines or responsibilities, changes to things such as changes in SEDS that might arise over the course of a school year. If you do not know who this person is at your LEA, I highly encourage you to reach out to your LEA administrators and ask, who is our LEA Special Education POC? And get in touch with them and see how you can support them and how they can support you in your job. Here's a brief overview of the responsibilities that an LEA Special Education Point of Contact has. For example, they are expected to attend monthly webinars hosted by OSSE. They are expected to look at the LEA Look Forward newsletter each week and pass on any important information to their staff. They should attend trainings held by OSSE when appropriate. They are also the person who accesses a tool called the OSSE Support Tool, where they can submit a ticket if there's ever an issue or something that OSSE needs to help them with, in particular with a database such as SEDS. We don't have a hotline. For example, if you have a staff member who's having trouble with SEDS, they don't pick up the phone and call OSSE. Rather, we would expect that that staff member would go to your LEA SE POC and ask them to help troubleshoot whatever SEDS issue is happening. And then if the POC is unable to resolve the issue, they would reach out to OSSE by submitting a ticket, which is a request for help from OSSE. And one other thing that the POC is expected to do is review regular reports that are found in SLED, and they've received training on how to get those reports in SLED. And those reports can help your school plan ahead and stay compliant, things like the backlog reports, the LEA Planning and Performance Report that I referenced earlier, and reports that have to do with getting the right records into SEDS when a student might be transferring. When a student with an IEP transfers to your LEA, here are some steps that you should immediately take. And of course, at the beginning of the school year, you're going to have a lot of new students transferring in, so it's definitely a team effort at your school to make sure these steps are taken as soon as possible. But also throughout the school year, you might get a transfer student. Once their records come into your SEDS account for your school, you should look at the student history. This gives you a brief overview of how long the student's been in special education, when they last had their IEP meeting, and when they last had an evaluation done. Then you should assign the student a case manager as soon as possible, and this is done in SEDS. Build the IEP team. Provide access to the IEP for all relevant teachers and staff, and this could mean giving them hard copies of the IEP, electronic copies of the IEP, or it could mean giving them access to SEDS so that they can see these records for themselves. It's up to you. You should assign related service providers if that student is receiving any kind of service. And you should add that student to that calendar we talked about where you have every student's IEP due date listed so that you don't miss any deadlines. Now let's talk briefly about key special education policies. DC at the state level, we have a variety of special education policies. What we've done is we've looked at the laws, the federal laws, and the local DC laws and regulations that have to do with special education and students with disabilities. And then we've created our own state level policies to set expectations for how schools will serve those students. And we do expect that schools are familiar with these policies. A copy of all the special ed policies that OSSE has is found on OSSE's website. Here are instructions for how to get to that website, but I'm going to take you live right now and show you exactly where to find those, because sometimes navigating the OSSE website can be a little tricky. So I'm going to go to OSSE's homepage, osse.dc.gov. Hopefully you're familiar with this homepage. From here, I'm going to go to Programs, and under Programs, I'm going to Specialized Education. Once I'm on the Special Education homepage, I'm going to scroll down, and I see a list of some programs. Under this list is a link to Policies and Regulations. On the Policy and Regulation page, you will see you can access federal laws, local policy guidance, local regulations, local policies, and technical assistance. Let's click on the link for local policies. This brings me to the page where every single special education policy is housed. Here you will see policies on child find, early childhood transition, for example, IEP amendment policy, IEP process policy, least restrictive environment, evaluation and reevaluation, secondary transition, etc. So they are all housed right here. From the slides, you can also directly link with the URL that I've provided here. There's a couple key policies that I would encourage you to become familiar with first, and that would include the Child Find policy, the Part B Initial Evaluation Reevaluation policy, the IEP Process policy, the IEP Implementation for Transfer Students policy, and the Policy and Procedures for Placement Review. And again, those can all be found on the website that I just showed you. Additionally, you should be very familiar with the rights of parents of students with disabilities, or what we refer to as the procedural safeguards. You provide this document to parents at different points along the way of an evaluation process. But in this document you should also be familiar with. It's not just for parents, but it's good for you to know the rights of the parents so that you can work together with them to best serve their son or daughter. Now, to provide you further training and technical assistance on our state level policies, we've come up with a policy and practice webinar series where we've taken each special education policy and created a webinar training video. And this is a great resource if, for example, you have a new staff member who's not familiar with BC and special education. You can assign these videos as homework for them to go watch and to have them get familiar with the policy. And in the videos, they talk about, obviously, the basics of each policy, as well as the laws underlying that policy, but it also shares best practices and does a few case studies to really make that policy come alive. And it always has a section at the end that connects what's in the policy to what you're doing inside of SED's Easy IEP. And it will let you know where you can find additional resources. So all of these videos are available to view on demand at any time on the OSSE website. And again, I'm going to show you where to find these on the website. We go back to the OSSE homepage where we started before. Again, this is osse.bc.gov. And I'm going to go to Programs, and under Programs, I'm going to Specialized Education. From this page, I'm going to find the program called Training and Technical Assistance. On this page, click on Resources. On the Resources page, if you scroll down, you will see a variety of resources that I just want to point out for a minute. We have a standards-based IEP resource guide. We also have a variety of toolkits. We have an LRE toolkit, a non-public school toolkit, which is really great if you have a student that is placed at a non-public or you're thinking about referring to be placed at a non-public. This talks about a lot of the expectations and the process there. We have a positive behavior support toolkit and a secondary transition toolkit. We also have a lot more secondary transition resources on this page, which are really great. And we have something called the Student-Led IEP Initiative that has videos, talking points, resources for how you can teach your students to advocate for themselves in their IEP meetings. You also see we have some links to things for SEDS. And now at the very bottom, there's a link to the webinars page. So let's click on the webinar page link. This will take us to an archived library of many different webinar training videos. For example, we have a behavior support webinar series. And here is what I wanted to show you is the policy and practice webinar series that I was just talking about. These are links to videos for every policy. So we encourage you to view those or to assign them to your staff to view. Now let's talk for 1 minute about key OSSE resources. Key OSSE resources include things on our website that we can support you with. First of all, I want to talk about how OSSE likes to keep in touch with your school. It's really important that we know who the key players are at your school. And sometimes we send out emails with important alerts or information either to your school leader or to the special education person or to the enrollment or registrar person. So OSSE compiles a list every year of the key players at each LEA. It's really important that this is up to date. Sometimes we try to reach out to somebody at an LEA only to find that they have quit and somebody new has replaced them and we didn't even know for several months. So by August 1st of each school year, and don't worry if it's past August 1st and you still haven't done this, please do it today. Send an email to the email addresses I've listed at the bottom of this slide and let OSSE know who is your head of school, who is your data manager, who is your LEA special education point of contact, your assessment specialist, your homeless liaison, finance and grants manager, information technology contact, and your limited English proficiency coordinator. Again, it's really important that we know who these people are, so please send an email and provide their name, title, phone, and email contact. Now, OSSE Resources. On this slide, you will see a list of resources. We already saw where these resources are on the OSSE website. Here you'll just find the direct links to them in case you want to go access them later. And again, we encourage you to use these resources. You can always follow up with us if you want any additional training for your staff. Now let's talk about one of the topics that really vexes schools at the beginning of the year, and that's how to get your hands on those student records. And in particular, I'm talking about students with disabilities who are in a special education program. It's one thing to get your student enrolled in your registration system, but it's a whole other thing to make sure that all of the special education records from the previous school get transferred over to your school. So first, let's talk about your responsibilities when it comes to a transfer student. And this includes students coming to you new at the beginning of the school year or who are coming to you in the middle of the school year. As soon as that student is officially enrolled in your school, not beforehand, because again, we don't want to get into a situation where you're discriminating against students with disabilities. So once a student is officially enrolled, these are the steps that you should take. You need to specifically ask the parent and ask the previous LEA whether the student is a student with a disability or if they have ever been referred as a potential student with a disability. These are part of your child find obligations. Now, sometimes the parent doesn't always tell you the truth, so it's also important to ask the previous LEA. There are also reports that you can look at that will show if a student enrolled at your school has special ed records in SEDS somewhere. Then you should ask for those records from the previous LEA within 5 business days of enrollment. This includes any special education records or referral documentation. It might be that the student is not yet in special ed, but they've been referred for an evaluation and the previous school didn't quite finish that evaluation. So now you have a duty to pick up where they left off. If you are the previous LEA, you need to be responsive to that school when they reach out to you and send them any records you have within 10 business days of their request. And of course, we encourage you not to wait the full 10 business days, but to respond as soon as possible because that new school is anxious to begin serving that student. Now, I will talk about a way that OSSE has made it easy to transfer these records within SEDS in a few minutes. However, if the student is coming to you from out of state, obviously they're not in your SEDS system yet. So you're going to have to get your hands on a copy of the IEP from the out-of-state school. Hopefully the parent has a copy or the out-of-state school will send you a copy, and then you have to manually upload that into SEDS. Now, if you know that they had an IEP, but for some reason you just can't get your hands on that IEP because they're from out of state, then you need to treat it like a child find situation, treat it like a referral, and start from scratch and start evaluating them to see if they still need to continue in special education. And you need to provide comparable services within 20 calendar days of receiving that out-of-state IEP. Now, for more details on the situation when a student comes to you from out of state, because it's a little bit tricky, the IEP implementation for transfer students policy available on our website provides a lot more detail here. Now, OSSE wants to help you out and make it as easy as possible to get those records transferred, especially in situations where the student's coming from another LEA within DC. All schools in DC use SEDS, so we try to make it easy to get those records transferred from one LEA SEDS account to the other. Your special ed POC at your school has access to a special report called Events Not Transferred. This report takes all the new students that are enrolled in your school and compares it to SEDS to see if that student happens to have any special ed records in SEDS. And then it produced a list of students. Basically, it's saying to you, hey, this student's enrolled in your school, but its special ed records are not yet transferred over. So it's prompting you to ask for those records. And your LEA SE POC has access to this report, and they have access to the OSSE support tool where they will make this transfer happen. What they do is they submit a request within the OSSE support tool for those records. And again, your POC should have received training on how to do this. Now, OSSE likes to help you out in getting records from one LEA to another, even though your duty by law is that each LEA has to work with each other and reach out to each other directly. We've just tried to make that easier by facilitating that with the OSSE support tool. Your school registrar and your LEA special ed point of contact need to work closely together to make sure all enrollment information is up to date and that all records are obtained. If there's something wrong with the student's enrollment information, then that's going to be a kink in the system, and you're not going to be able to get those records in SEDS until everything is resolved with the enrollment issue, because the student information system with the enrollment information transfers information over to SEDS. So please work with your registrar to make sure everything is smooth. Otherwise, there's going to be a delay in you getting those special education records. Now, if you are the previous LEA who has sent the student over to the new LEA, you also have responsibilities during this transition period of the student leaving your school and going to the new school. During this sort of limbo period, because it does take a long time sometimes for a student to get enrolled in the new LEA. For example, a parent might tell you, hey, I'm going to enroll my student in this new school, and they say they're going to do it, but it still might be a long time before they actually do it. So during that transition time, you have to treat the situation like that student still belongs to you, and you have to keep going with any evaluations or IEP meetings or reevaluations until that child is officially enrolled in the new LEA. You need to continue to provide them services even if the parent tells you they're going to be leaving your school. So continue with that and ensure that they have a case manager, an IEP team, etc. Then, once the student actually becomes officially enrolled in the new school, now you no longer are providing services to that student because they are officially in the new school, but you still need to help out by responding to that request from the new school when they ask for you to send over the records. And you need to provide as much information to them as you can just to help them out. They've never had the student before. They don't know the student as well as you know them. So help them out by sending any information that you can to help them get to know the student and be able to serve them as soon as possible. Here's how it looks with the responsibilities between the new LEA, the previous LEA, and OSSE. So who's doing what during this student record transfer? The new LEA, of course, is enrolling the new student and then immediately asking the parent if the child has an IEP or has previously been referred. Once they ask that and they find out that yes, there are special education records somewhere, they reach out to the old school and request those records. And again, this request can be done very easy with just a click of a button within the OSSE support tool. Then the previous LEA confirms or denies that those records should be sent over. And again, they need to be responsive. They can't sit around dragging their feet. And this is all done within the OSSE support tool, where they can click a button to either deny or accept that request for transfer of records. Sometimes the previous LEA is going to need to deny that request. For example, if that student is still at your school, you should deny a request to transfer the records to another school. That means there was some kind of error. For some reason, a different school is requesting records, but that student is still sitting in your school. So if that's the case, please submit a ticket to the OSSE support tool so that we can investigate what's going on there. However, if that student has left your school and is enrolled in that new school, go ahead and approve that transfer of records. And then OSSE will go ahead and move the records from one SEDS account to the other. So as you can see here, all three parties play a role in this, and OSSE is going to be monitoring LEAs to make sure that you're responding to these requests and making the requests in a timely manner. Because any holdup here means that a student with a disability is not getting the services that they need. So this is very important to keep this process moving. Now let's talk about how you can stay informed of any upcoming training opportunities. There's two main ways to stay informed. Number one, please subscribe to the weekly newsletter that comes from OSSE every Wednesday, and this is called the LEA Look Forward. This will always advertise any upcoming trainings and how to register for them. The other way is to look at the calendar of events on the OSSE homepage, and I will show you how to access that. First of all, here's how you subscribe to the LEA Look Forward, by clicking this link and typing in your name and email address. And here I just have a snapshot of what that newsletter might look like when it comes to you in an email every Wednesday afternoon. And here is how you access the calendar of events on the OSSE homepage. So you go to osse.dc.gov, and then down on the right-hand side, if you scroll down, you should see a section called Upcoming Events, and there should be a link that says More. That will lead you to the full calendar of events. Now, to conclude this webinar, let's talk about key terms. Let's say you are new to DC. There might be a lot of acronyms people are throwing around and you have no idea what they mean. These next several slides are a glossary of key terms that you might encounter. Now, I'm not going to read through every single definition. I'm just going to briefly show you these slides, and then if you want to go back and study these slides and use it as a reference, feel free to download a copy of the slides from the same website where you accessed this recording, and you can print it off and use it as a glossary. Perhaps you're not new, but maybe some of your staff members are new, just so they can get familiar with these key terms. So here are the key terms. We have DC CATS, which is a database that we use for monitoring and compliance. We have ESSE, ESSE, that's just the acronym for our Division of Elementary, Secondary, and Specialized Education. And here's a brief description of what our division does here at OSSE. ESY means Extended School Year. FAPE is Free and Appropriate Public Education. Here's IEP defined, the IDEA, LRE, and the LEA SE POC. Alphabet soup, right? So if you're not familiar with these, please study them up later. We have LEA, non-public school. Some people are unfamiliar with what it means to place a student at a non-public school for special ed services. OSSE, and the OSSE support tool, which I've referred to throughout this webinar. This slide explains the difference between Part B of the IDEA laws and Part C of the IDEA laws. Basically, it's the age of the student. One is about infants and toddlers, and one is about school-age students. So different parts of the IDEA law talk about those different age groups. Section 504, SEDS, SEA, SLED, and TOTE. Again, these are all defined on this slide. TOTE is important if you have any students that need a transportation service. That is the database where you put in those requests for a student, for example, to receive a bus ride to school if they qualify because of their disability. That concludes our webinar. If you have any questions about this webinar or any other questions about how you can receive support from OSSE, please shoot us an email at osse.tta@dc.gov. Thank you and have a great day.